Okay, we're
Yeah,
starting
it's a long
again.
trip from the Bay Area down to San Francisco.
Oh, did it
I
work?
once. It seems to be working.
We're live.
It
Yeah, I
says
mean
we
it's
have
a
an
haul.
excellent
It's like
connection.
350 miles. It's miles.
Yeah,
But
I drove from Victorville to Vallejo once with my roommate, and I was from the Midwest, and I was like, oh, we're just in California. What can it take? A couple hours to get across the state? Well, yeah, if you're going west to east, it takes a couple
hey,
hours.
it's no
Yes,
problem. Yeah, north to
but
south. Yeah, it's like 15 hours to go from top to bottom, but it's a ridiculously large
yeah,
swath of land.
if you're going from like the high desert to Northern California, that's like going across half the country
Yeah,
almost.
it really is. It's like driving from Florida Panhandle to Virginia. For those of us that use those as a metric, Roland, it's like going from Stuttgart to Hamburg. I have no idea what
That
that means.
I, I doubt that is not that far.
It's like going from Rome to Paris.
There you go. Yeah.
That's further, yeah.
That's
What is
probably
it?
more like it.
I wonder what is the equivalent of like 350 miles in Germany?
Although to be
They don't
fair,
use
you don't
miles
have to
there. You
cross the
can't.
Alps. You don't have to cross the
350
Alps to get to NorCal from Southern Cal.
But Germany's a big one though. Like Munich to Hamburg. Maybe that's a good one.
Well, I can safely say it is very close to Berlin to a northern island called Sylt. And that's like around 600, so it's slightly more.
Yeah, it looks like
Zurich.
it would be. I'm looking here on the Google Maps, and it seems to think that it would be like driving from Munich to Hamburg.
Yeah.
So there you go. You could do it, and you could go see the beautiful palm trees in Munich, and then head back up to Hamburg
Palm trees.
and
Aw.
the beautiful beaches of Munich. Okay.
Our hamburgers indeed from Hamburg.
No. Never eat a hamburger in Hamburg. The last time I did that, I got a food poisoning.
You know what you also don't
Okay.
do? You don't eat a wolf in Wolfsburg, because there's a Wolfsburg nearby. So.
Yes, the old Volkswagen plant.
Mm.
Ah, yes. I wrote a song about that had Wolfsburg in it.
I had a Westphalia, which I think came from there.
It did.
It's
Well,
funny because I once went to that plant and I found out that I can't buy their products because they're too small. So that sucks.
Well, back in the early 70s, then the 60s and stuff, you can move the seat back on a Type 1 Beetle pretty far back. So
Yeah, it's not enough.
I used to have a Beetle. I loved them. They're so much fun to work on.
Well, there's books about it, and people that wrote those books seem to really, really like it.
Are you talking about John Muir? Not the John Muir, but
Yeah.
John Muir's How to Keep Your Volkswagen Alive Forever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The guy that
It
was
some-
probably
it's like
completely.
when your brakes overheat and you're driving through the mountains, just pull over to the side and bawl in the back seat for a while.
Yeah, it's pretty much.
That was
what he-
actually in the book.
Yeah. He's just like, I don't know, have you tried getting really high? Like, okay. Sounds good, buddy. Yeah, that book was from a different era.
I had that book.
Yeah, I
It
think
told
we
you how
still
to
got it
disable your
around
car's
here.
choke.
Yeah, I mean, if you have an 80s era Westie, you better know how to fix it or have a good friend who's a mechanic.
All right, let's get.
So here
on
we
to
are,
Here we
talking about Volkswagen maintenance today.
Volkswagens that were stopped being produced before some of us were born here.
Yes, some.
Oh, get out of here!
Not me.
Not gonna
Not
do
me
this
though.
today.
I'm very old.
I think we lost you there, Jonathan. You've gotten real quiet.
No, I just turned my head so that I can squirt cats.
Oh, okay. That works.
Okay, so I put in the podcast topics just a couple of notes after we get done with the general idea of what Dwarf Fortress is to us. Then some topics that people who are new to the game may not get. So, and like maybe talk about what those things are. I just got 4 in there, but I think that will probably be fine for us for today. And this might end up going into another episode at some point.
FPS death. Yep, these are all legit topics.
Yep.
So
I don't.
I've pulled up
I know
the
that
stream.
Roland said that it was a good. What's that?
I said it just for anyone who's listening along. I have pulled up the stream of the really old world that we have.
What is that clock thing in the middle of it? Is that a clock?
This right here.
Oh no, that's your
That's the trade
Never
depot.
mind.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's alive to come trade with us though, so I think that's part of the problem here.
If you have it in a very small in the preview window on YouTube, it looks like a clock in the center of the window there.
I'm still trying to remember why I've written out sorry here, but anyway, every time I load this world,
You know, it's good to be preemptive. All right. So I do take. I know that Roland, I think, said that it sounded like a good idea, but I take it that you also are cool with going over a What is Dwarf Fortress episode, because we've never really done that.
I think that sounds like a great place to start.
Cool. All right. Hey everybody, welcome back to Dwarf Fortress Roundtable. So how are you guys doing?
Very nice.
Well, really
Well,
enjoying the turn of the seasons here in the Northern Hemisphere. I suppose they turn as well in the Southern Hemisphere, but they're turning into the more favorable seasons now, I think. So, yes.
I guess that depends on who you are, though.
That's true. If you're Santa Claus, turning to winter is probably good, but yeah.
If you own a ski resort, it's probably getting worse in the Southern Hemisphere for you.
Are there a lot of good ski resorts in the Southern Hemisphere?
I don't know.
There has to be at least one.
Well, Australia has ski resorts.
Yes.
What about Chile?
Yes.
If we have any Chilean
Maybe.
Listeners, let us know if you have ski resorts there in the was it the Andes? That are in
Yeah,
the that are in
probably.
Chile?
They've got a lot of mountains there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
You'd
just
think
depends
that
on whether
somebody
they're
would
the
ski.
skiable ones. I'm sure they are. I'm sure somebody's sitting here going, "Oh, come on, guys."
Yeah.
No, there
Anywho,
are.
It's par for the course.
anywho,
Yeah. Anyway.
I was thinking last week that we have, in our entire run of episodes, this is number 66 here, we have never sat down and just said, hey, what is Dwarf Fortress? If we were trying to explain Dwarf Fortress to somebody, someone wanted to listen in, you know, if you've tuned in, we talk about everything as if you know what Dwarf Fortress is, that you've played the game before, because really, if you're going to get to episode 66 in this podcast, you probably already played Dwarf Fortress. But
or it might be time to contact someone you love about getting help.
I don't guess that is completely true, because I do have a friend I've brought up before that listens to the podcast just to hear us talk.
Oh,
He doesn't
yeah,
actually play the
that's-
game.
yeah.
But
hey,
it's a little
friends, how's it
strange.
going? Right. So where should we dig into this thing? It's kind of I don't know about you guys, but everyone I know doesn't play it. I think you guys are the people that I know that play it. Everyone else that I know doesn't. And so it can be really tricky to talk about to people that don't know. And sometimes you'll hear people who are like, I looked at that and it looks like an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you know, you can try to tell them that it doesn't have to look like that, but by the time you finish the sentence of saying, well, it doesn't have to look like that, they've already stopped listening. So
Yeah.
You must be
yeah,
using Dwarf Therapist, right?
I see my dwarf therapist often. Thank you very much. No, yeah. So I guess that's kind of one of the things is like, where do you begin to talk about like this in a way that people would continue to listen to what you have to say?
Yeah.
I usually start with it's an indie game. And then I usually qualify that with saying, well, you know, it's not really a game per se. It's like a simulation.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're sort of
And then it
along for
starts
the
going
ride.
off the rails. Right.
Yeah, yeah, and then you just get into like the massive cobweb of trying to explain it, and you're like, oh yeah, and it's like a simulation. You see, it's like a fantasy thing, and you make your world and blah 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 blah. But I always default to trying to explain it with other computer games because usually I do talk to people that at least know what Sims are. And I really like the like explanation of it's like Sim City, but every sim is like really fleshed out. Every item is really fleshed out, and the Sims die all the time, and it's devastating and horrific and really cool. Also, I bring up the favorite animal and say that of that animal there exists like a human kind of version. You know, helps making people be interested in the game.
On that note, it's not always a human version because I think somebody posted to the subreddit that an alligator had ascended to the role of king of a
Yeah, I
civilization.
saw that. You're just a normal alligator, and he was king.
And that's when people will look at you and just blink a couple times and then say, "Should we go somewhere?"
Yeah.
This is how does an alligator become? They're not sentient, are they? Was this in Legends
No.
mode?
Yeah.
So
I
it's
mean,
just a
honestly,
trick of
there
the
have
Legends
been
mode
worse
thing, huh?
choices that people have voted into power in the real world than an alligator. So
I mean, there is a dog as a mayor somewhere. I've read a story about that. He was even re-elected.
where in Florida was that? Do you remember?
Oh God, I'm gonna have to cut that. We have Florida listeners, you know.
Oh, if you're from Florida, you get it.
Yeah, I don't know where that is, but he got re-elected. I think even multiple times, and it's like a very fluffy golden retriever.
Oh, good boy.
It's very cute. So I can see why somebody would actually elect an animal just out of protest. Every single candidate is bad, so I'm gonna elect this alligator that just eats things. We throw things at the alligator and it eats it, and that is the whole elected official of our town. Like, yeah, I want to buy a street, make a street or buy a house, and you're like, oh yeah, you have to talk to the mayor. Yeah, well, where is he? Yeah, he's over there eating the chicken.
Well, Roland, you'll be happy to know that that at least 7 dogs have held the office of mayor in the United States.
What? 7?
Yeah.
Wow.
Is that all?
Just 7. It looks
I
like
remember the Snoopy for president years.
it looks like Kentucky has 3 dog mayors, which is pretty exciting. California's got 2, so that's great.
Wow.
And Minnesota has 1.
Wait,
And the California one
currently?
is that one of them is Idlewild, which is this little tiny town up in the top of the mountains between Palm Springs and Los Angeles. And so I feel it's probably very tongue in cheek.
Wait. Currently,
I think I think the mayor passed away after his second term in Idlewild.
So, Roland, each individual city and township in the U.S. basically chooses its own form of self-government. There are various kinds. I can't remember what the terms are for them, but one is where the mayor is the chief executive and has quite a bit of power. There are other types where all the power is vested in a city council, where they could have a mayor, but the mayor is pretty much only a figurehead or a ceremonial position. So I could very much see on a council-led city or town where the mayor is totally ceremonial and they could elect a dog,
Yeah, so it's for those listening. If you'd like to see about the mayor that we're just talking about, he has a website called mayormax.com.
I'll put a link to it in the show notes.
And yeah, we'll link to this in the show notes. And the mayor has now been replaced by a trio of mayors: Max, 2, Mikey, and Mitzi, 3 delightfully cute golden retrievers.
I can't believe this.
We seem to
Welcome
be
to Dwarf Fortress Roundtable, your American civics lesson
and dog mayors.
about dog mayors.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably not a lot to do in Idlewild. They're not going to build anything, and not much happens there except people from
true, but
LA and Palm Springs
it
who want to
is
see snow.
still
Like
it is still a very weird thing.
Dude,
hell of
its
an airport,
purpose
though.
is like for people in California to go play in the snow for the hour, to drive up, fill the bed of their pickup truck with snow, and then drive back down to to the sun and have snowball
Was
fights
it
on
the
beach.
Sierras or the San Gabriels or
Yeah,
what?
it's Mount San. How do you say it? Jacinto, whatever. The one. It's the big one. If you're in Palm Springs and you look up, that's the range.
Okay. So it's in the. I think those are the. Is it the Bear Mountains?
Sure.
I think so.
Los Osos.
Anyway.
Anyway,
Back to Dwarf Fortress.
sure. So anyway, that's basically it. Thanks for listening today.
So if you were going to give a comp for a video game, what would be the first game that comes to mind to say, okay, Dwarf Fortress, have you ever played X?
What is
Well,
I will insert crickets there.
it? RimWorld is
Yeah,
often
okay.
a gateway drug into Dwarf Fortress, but that in itself requires a bit of a leap. But it's we've talked about RimWorld before. It's also an excellent game. Loads of fun. Maybe potentially even more brutal in a lot of ways.
I think The Sims
The
is
Sims?
is
Yeah.
a decent way to look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the big difference here is that SimCity, you manage like a whole city and like 100,000 of people. But the big difference is that those people in SimCity are not real Sims. Like they have no personality. They do nothing. They're just, shapes walking over your pavement and like filling the streets. But they're not actually doing anything.
Right. Now I'm not talking about SimCity. I'm talking about The Sims.
Yeah. Right. The ones where you...
But in a much grander scale.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. If you take, if like the Sims would be like one bedroom in a fortress.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like I almost think of it as like a story that you're allowed to kind of play along with and guide. And I think it's a story that's kind of going to tell itself, and then you can make choices to try to not die. But
Yeah, I think one of the big things that differentiates Dwarf Fortress from real-time strategy games and like The Sims and things like that is that your dwarves, even if you give them orders, have autonomy. You
true.
can tell them that you want them to do something, but if they don't want to do it, they're not going to do it. They'll go do something else if that's what they choose to do.
Yeah.
Cleano Dev, help us out here, buddy. Okay.
Is Cleanodev in the chat room?
I don't know. I was hoping.
We will find out now.
Help. If they are.
Other games that you can compare it to. I mean, yes, you can compare it to RimWorld, but RimWorld in itself is already so like special and niche that it really does feel like just like the difference between like milk and skim milk. I'm not trying to shit on RimWorld. It's a very nice game, but I'm just saying it's so close. And I can't really say it's like, you can't describe it as like RimWorld because it's so close. It's like distant cousin.
Dwarf Fortress, RimWorld with extra fat.
Yeah. It's like RimWorld, but like fantasy RimWorld with several Z layers.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you've played RimWorld and you like that, then and you want it to take it sort of a little farther, this is probably the game for you.
Yeah, maybe. The people who I would be telling about Dwarf Fortress who don't know what Dwarf Fortress is probably don't know what RimWorld is either.
Yeah,
Possibly.
So the lady in the supermarket line the other day was very patient as I told her all about it.
Oh no, you didn't.
I'm joking.
I always feel really bad when I try to like tell my mother about it because I feel like an insane rambler sitting there at like the breakfast table and like telling her like, oh yeah, there somebody drew the one forgotten beast that I talked about or whatever, and I'm really excited, and she's also excited because I'm excited, but then I'm trying to explain it and she sits there and it goes like, I wonder how you can get all these things in your head, and I'm like, yeah.
It's called Dwarf Fortress Wiki.
Yeah, it is, and like I tried to explain a single screenshot And that already reminded me of how abstract the entire game is, because at some point you just lose the sense of abstraction. You know, you see what you're looking at. I start the game now and I see what I'm looking at, no matter which tile set I play, and
Yeah.
I
I
still
see
struggle
people
with
moving
that in
around and
ASCII.
stuff.
I'm still not very good when it comes to ASCII at visualizing things.
Yeah, it is harder on ASCII. That is correct, but ultimately it comes down to it. You know, there's a tavern, so every single person in the tavern is like socializing, and then you automatically build like a small little thing around that where like people are talking to each other. And I can really see like some of the grungy dwarfs with their hands on their hips talking to each other. Not like, yes, my day was really nice. I tanned 54 beak dog pelts today. But try to get that into the head of somebody that never played it.
Well, it is tough. Like, you talk to people about, you can find out all this stuff about different dwarves, and there's so much to them. Like, I'm just looking at this one that seems to be having a hard time, and you can kind of figure out what is interesting to me, and when I've talked to programmers about this game, they will often comment that is a lot to try to keep track of in a game, from a variables perspective. All of these things that Tarn is kind of doing for each one of these creatures, having each one of these feelings sort of manifest itself as some sort of a variable in the development environment, I think makes people's heads hurt. um, but it's super interesting. So maybe that's a way through. If people can program software, you can tell them, look, you don't understand. He's simulating toenails. Do you know what that means?
And but that goes so quickly into like a whole rabbit hole, you know, when you explain what you see in a combat, and then they're like, wait, he's chopping off the head, and they assume it's like some kind of animation, and they're like, no, it's like procentual randomly generated combat. So there is actually a item sword that is interacting with a body part head and slicing it off, because the person that is swinging the sword is strong enough, and then you see their face just starting to frown because they don't know what the fuck you're talking about, you know, like what. And you're like, yeah, you know, the strength of this the dwarf, you know, has like strength parameters, and then he swings the sword in a specific way, and you're like, I sound insane when I try this.
You do get the look in their eyes once they find out that this is not animated, that you just actually have to go to a separate screen and go back and read what happened. They look like, why would you want to play that?
Yeah.
That does not seem like it would be fun at all.
Well, it's tricky too, because I do have a friend that downloaded it and loaded, and brought it up, and I think sometimes people don't take you seriously when you say, no, you should absolutely use some kind of a tutorial for this, or some sort of a guide, because otherwise this isn't going to make any sense to you at all. And I think in the modern video game era, even if you don't understand a game or have a clue, or it seems kind of labyrinthine, you can usually figure it out if you just sit down and start pressing buttons and bashing away at it. But I think this is a bit different, because you really can't, in any sort of meaningful way, or at least I couldn't. And I tried to get into this game many times over the course of the last decade, and it wasn't really until I found the Paradixis tutorial that it all just kind of clicked. So that's yet another plug for that one.
I think there may have been one exception, but it seems like pretty much every guest we've ever had on here has had the same story. They try to play the game, they hear about the game, they try to play the game, they go, this is just unplayable, and they stop playing it for a few months, and then they come back, and 3 months, 4 months, 6 months later, they play it again, knowing what they're getting into, and then they stick with it and they play it. I mean, that's the way it was for all three of us, right?
It was very much.
Pretty much, but I don't think I had that much of a like layoff phase. Truly, I just stuck by it and tried to learn it.
Maybe you're the special one.
I mean, I just went through that whole tutorial, and it got me smart enough to basically understand how to keep the fortress alive long enough to start trying to figure out other things.
Yeah.
And that was
again
that was all it took.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and that was really all it took. Just don't
Mine
die. Sorry.
certainly was the Dwarf Fortress Wiki quick start tutorial. That is what drove it into my head on how to play the game. And I don't think that I have ever played it all the way through, but it got me up with farms. And once I was up with farms and building bedrooms, from there you've got enough under your belt that you can start experimenting and playing with things.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
But so we've spent 30 minutes and
We've got it. Everybody knows now.
Dog mayors.
We've covered Idleweld's dog mayors.
But that is just talking about the fort mode, by the way. And now try to explain that it's not just SimCity, but it's also Sims in like an adventure mode kind of type clicker Skyrim-esque shopping simulator, wrestling simulator, And
adventure mode's much easier to explain, right? It's like a really detailed RPG. Heard of Dungeons and Dragons?
But it's also like generated per tick, so that it's not like a live action kind of thing. It's per tick.
True, but if you were trying to tell somebody, what Dwarf Fortress Adventure Mode is, that's a lot easier than Dwarf Fortress Mode. I mean, you can go into as much detail as you want. Yeah, it is different than any, Baldur's Gate game or anything like that. It is procedurally generated. But if I'm trying to tell my dad about adventure mode, I would find that much easier than telling him about fortress mode.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's easier to talk about adventure mode because it makes more sense to people because people have played those kind of games before. But I think it's harder to play, infinitely harder to play than all those other games.
Fun.
Like it doesn't have, there's no structure to it. And I think part of the thing that people want in a game is some element of structure, but I'd say adventure mode only works if you have a plan for it going into it. Maybe that's wrong. Maybe it is okay to just drop in. I guess I could kind of imagine that, but really it's not going to tell you to go do stuff. And the idea of quests, that doesn't really work right now, I don't think. So you're kind of on your own to sort of figure it out, like some YouTube streamers do.
Yeah.
Roland, you've had some pretty long adventure mode. What you say?
Adventures. Yes.
Sorry, I heard a noise. Sound like someone just came into my house. Let me go check to see if I'm getting robbed here. Be right back.
Yeah, please do.
A forgotten beast has arrived.
Oh no, it's a were panda.
Oh no. Yeah, well, we'll definitely have to include information about these dog mayors because that's really fascinating. I'm really glad that we were able to spend some time to get to the bottom of that.
Yeah, the 20 minutes talking about dog mayors, you mean?
Okay, well, I'm back. Sorry. Okay. No forgotten beast was coming through my
that's good.
Fortress
just
entrance.
Were beasts.
Okay, so in this fortress, the old world that we've got up running, I was just noticing we've got a holy luxury. Interesting. We've got a first wealth and a sacred bile. Those are our
bile.
Ew. Sacred bile. It's disgusting. Absolutely disgusting, Tarn. Come on. Yeah, fascinating stuff.
Where were we?
We were talking about
we
the
were talking
Forgotten
about adventure
Beast.
mode.
Oh,
right.
Oh, can you hit Forgotten Beasts in adventure mode? Is that a thing that happens?
Yes, you can, but most of the time you don't actually get the possibility to get very close, because they're huge and they're fast, and unless you know what you're doing, you're gonna get crushed very quickly. I tried that once.
Okay,
it was over in like 2 ticks.
That checks out.
And then you have then you have Legends mode.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is the story mode. That one's kind of easy to explain because I've told people about that one, and I think nowadays, because of stuff that people see about AI and like all the open AI stuff, I don't think that one's as hard for people to grok because people can kind of imagine the computer can write a story.
Yeah, I like to explain it like you're some kind of scholar in a very large library, like in the in-game library, and every world has like its own library with the own history for that very specific world. So you can just walk in and like cross-reference things. You go in and you check the year or a very specific item, and then you see the connections between the item that was used by that specific person to kill that specific person, and then you go to that killed person. You realize like 10 years later he got resurrected as a zombie, and you're like, oh, neat. um, that I like to imagine that as you sitting there and like trying to piece together a story from just historical books that somebody wrote during the world, and you're basically sitting at the end of the timeline and just reading all of this.
That's a good way to describe it, I think, because it puts together some kind of a narrative, but
Yeah,
you
but you have to piece a lot of it together yourself.
exactly, and I think there are definitely YouTubers out there who are really good at that and can do it in a way that makes it feel like a really coherent narrative by filling in the gaps very creatively. And I think if you're looking for that kind of a game where you can almost give yourself a sense of purpose when you play it, like you've decided that the alligator became the baron of this town and you're going to be the one to, I don't know, rescue them from themselves or so, like if you can kind of like shim yourself into the story, and I think that would change and add a lot of richness and depth. I'm not very good at that though. I just kind of go for it.
Yeah, I think that I've heard Tarn Adams describe the game as a fantasy world simulator,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
not so much a game, but yeah, since there's no end goal for anything in the game, you create a world and you watch it play out.
Try not to die.
Yeah, from different levels of what's the word I'm looking for? You can either look at it in the micro level or the macro level. I mean, the ultimate micro level would be adventure mode, and the ultimate macro level would be legends mode, where you're just reading it as it played out.
Mm.
And everybody's favorite mode, it seems, fortress mode, is somewhere in the middle there. You watch your fortress play out, and you try not to die doing it.
That's the hope.
Okay. So there are a few terms that I thought that we might go over that perhaps are unique to Dwarf Fortress. And whenever we say them on our podcast and someone's listening who doesn't play Dwarf Fortress, they might really not know what the heck we're talking about or what we mean by them. And one of them that we say quite often, unfortunately, is FPS death. So, Roland, why don't you describe exactly what FPS death means?
Okay. It describes your PC's inability to complete the next amount of like processing power needed to get the next tick done in a coherent amount of time, meaning that it feels like you're slowly cranking up the graphics level on the game that you're playing right now. So you start out with a really good amount of FPS, like 120 or whatever, the amount of FPS that I would need to play a shooter, for example. And then you slowly crank it up. So at some point you will notice you're now only at 100, or just the word CADs. Yep, that's not an explanation.
Let me butt in here for just a second. FPS, by the way, stands for frames per second.
Right, I should have explained that as well. Yeah, like the amount of pictures per second that you see that your PC has to generate to make a moving picture out of it, like a moving video.
But I do think the concept is somewhat different than it is for people who might be thinking about FPS in the terms of like CS:GO or something. It's less about, you know, screen refresh and, you know, lag, like what is it, you know, that kind of like, you know, because I think if you talk to most gamers about the difference between 30 FPS and 60 FPS, you know, they'll say, oh, a 60 FPS is a lot smoother of an experience, but really it's not like that. It's almost like it's the amount of compute that can be done within a second of the game play. And so yeah, it's a funny, I feel like it's kind of an inconsistent use of the concept of FPS, because it's not like a first person shooter kind of thing where, you know, it's like you're literally like scrolling around and looking and the screen's redrawing that many times. This is just the number of cycles that the CPU is taking to execute everything that needs to happen that turn. I guess that's
Oh my. I just realized FPS is also first person shooter death.
Yes.
Someone hears a Dwarf Fortress person talking about FPS death, and they may think about, oh, you go into 3D mode and you kill things. That's an FPS
God,
death.
I wish.
Yeah, it would be pretty wild in 3D mode with this. Adventure mode 3D.
But
yeah, and for computer geeks, the game runs in a single thread, so it's executing everything all at the same time, and I've understood that to be more of a, you know, less of a, you know, the developer doesn't understand how to use multi-threading, and more of a, these things actually really only work if they execute sequentially, because you can't really you know, it's like the game's not really designed to be broken up into different threads and executed separately. It all sort of needs to happen at the same time. That's kind of the way I'd understood it, but I'm sure somebody out there can tell me I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, that is also the way that I understood it, because, for example, the weight of a mace being swung has impact on the actual damage that you do when it swings against the body. So you have to process the density of the weapon, so that the weight, the density of the weapon that is swinging against the density and weight of the body that it is slamming into. And then on top of that, you have layers of clothing that can pad the impact. And then the clothing can rip or tear and make the next swing happen differently. Plus, then you have in the body, you have bones and like organs that can be influenced. And you see, this is like a whole like line of processes that you have to do. And at some point, your PC has to do so many that it can't continue doing them at a pace where you feel something is progressing in your fortress. It's so slow that your PC is trying to chug out the movement patterns of like 200 dwarves and 400 cats, and he's like, please fill me up with water, make it stop, and gives out like 3 FPS if you're lucky.
But there are inefficiencies that happen though, where you can enact some element of control over that. And I think in this fort that we have streaming, a cat got trapped on the wrong side of a door in the caverns, and that brought the FPS down to like 1. And I think it's because the game just gets stuck trying to figure out. I don't really even understand what's happening there, but it had something to do with the cat being stuck outside the gate, and that in itself was enough to topple the FPS of the fort until I opened the door for the cat, and then everything sped back up again. and I've seen that same thing sometimes if somebody gets stuck in a tree, that can break your game. So sometimes you have to play a little bit of Sherlock Holmes to try to figure out where, if suddenly the fortress starts dying like that, you have to figure out how to unstick it. Unless your fortress is just too big or your computer's old, in which case you're probably doomed anyway, because just having a lot of dwarves can slow you down. Like this particular fortress that we're streaming right now is, I think it has 144 dwarves, and so this fortress is running at, I think, 60 FPS, which is totally playable. But if it doubled that, it would probably be, we'd probably see diminishing returns pretty fast on that FPS.
Yeah. If you want to find out more about FPS stuff and things you can do to mitigate it, we have a couple episodes, I think, that we go over that, and I'll try to link them in the show notes.
Oh, that was cool of us.
Yeah, I know, right? So, I don't know if we actually covered this one in any of those shows, but I have seen recently, I don't know whether it was on Reddit or someone sent in an email to us, but their way to do it to help with FPS stuff was to play a 1x1 tile embark location. Whenever you're doing your choosing your embark location, typically I think it's 3x3. If you narrow that down to 1x1, you still have the vertical room to do all of the fortressing that you need, but your map just isn't nearly as big on the surface, and each layer is not nearly as big. And they were saying that really, really does a great job for helping out with keeping your FPS up, even with a really complex fort.
Shrinking the starting location size. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you're getting started in the game too, it's probably gives you a bit more of a chance to not be completely overwhelmed by the vastness of a landscape as well.
Yeah, you have to choose it really carefully though, so that you have at least I would think so, to make sure that you put that right up against a river.
Well, yeah, a river, but also make sure that for like maximum efficiency, you actually don't want a place with a lot of trees, because trees can also take away some of the processing power. So I think a small river, maybe even a brook, no waterfall, in a almost or completely treeless environment like a desert.
Yeah, I would hesitate before recommending someone brand new to the game chooses a desert for their embark location.
Yeah, because then your dwarves get
some
angry
wooded,
when they can't sleep.
Like I think there's like one called sparse woodland or something like that.
Yeah, because what you could do is you could deploy in a place with a few trees or quite a number of trees and just clear cut it. And then you get the benefit
every
of having
so often,
the wood.
because they keep spawning in. Yeah. That's what I do.
I didn't know that the trees grew.
Yeah, they grow constantly.
Yeah.
It's
Interesting.
I started completely ignoring everything that has like high tree density because it bugs me. It really does annoy me. So I usually only go for things that have like sparse trees.
Cool.
And even when I ignore my trees, because at some point I will not need more wood, I just don't. They will keep on growing, and at some point I will have like a really big forest, and then I have to clear cut the entire map again.
Cool. I'll have to pay attention to that. I never realized that happened.
It takes a while.
I guess that once you punch down into the caverns, spoiler alert, there are caverns under your fortress. But once you punch down to the caverns, you can have access to pretty much all the wood that you need from the fungi wood.
Better wood.
Yeah. You think that's better wood?
Yeah, obviously.
Fungi
it
wood?
has better colors.
That's true.
Also mushroom wood. And if you find nether caps, then you have cold beds. Okay, obviously you wouldn't make a bed out of it. You would make a barrel out of it so you can cool your beer, but that's just me.
Nether caps. Okay, tangent here. I've never heard of this term. What is a nether cap?
I think I know nether caps either.
Really? Okay, it's an underground tree. There are a lot of different underground trees. One is a nether cap. It's like a darkish blue. Uh, that tree is very cold. I think it's around freezing temperatures, like 0 degrees or something. So the wood itself is technically not magma safe because it's wood, but it can sustain, like it can survive some fire because it's cold. Um, it's very funny. So you can technically make a pump stack out of it or something, like a screw pump stack out of the nether cap wood, and it will be fine even if you're pumping magma. Don't
Really?
sue me if it goes wrong though. Um, I personally just use it for barrels because it's a nice RPG kind of thing, like cool beer.
Hmm.
However, just quick note, they're not in the first cavern layer. They're usually in the second, sometimes, but mostly they're in the third, if you have the third.
Spoiler alert, there are more than one cavern
Yeah,
layers.
there are more than one, and they get increasingly bad the further down you go.
Well, bad.
Yeah, well, yeah,
Fun.
the creatures become more absurd. The trees become, the first, like, big mushroom. Yeah, okay. And then you get like blood thorns, which apparently is not something that looks like a tree. It looks more like a bloody piece of intestine growing. Um,
Vivid.
Amazing, by the way. I love that idea. So yeah.
All right. So I think that the last little topic that we're going to cover here today in our intro to Dwarf Fortress is the concept of fun. That is surrounded by exclamation points and in all caps. Fun, and you'll see it written on the forums that way a lot. Um, and that is tied to the idea that losing is fun, which is kind of the Dwarf Fortress mantra. Losing is fun.
Yes. I would.
And I think this is. Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to say it's mostly the idea that there is no end goal. There is no like winning screen. It's not like you can kill all the enemies and then the game is like, yeah, you won. You are now the Dwarf Fortress. Nothing like that. It just keeps on going. If you kill every single entity in the entire game, guess what? Nothing happens. You just continue with the game. So there, you can win. Thus, you can only lose. Yeah.
So I have heard somebody say that eventually your fortress will fail, no matter how long it goes. Eventually, something is going to happen to bring it down, whether it's strife from within, attacks from without. But have you, and either one of you, I've obviously never done this, but have either one of you just let a fortress go so long after? Well, Roland, you've killed everybody else in your world before, right? Or for the most part.
Well, I had like a Goblin Island that I just, continue to have because I found it funny, like a world zoo. But I killed almost every single elf. I killed almost every single human except for like a very small civilization of, I don't know, like 20 humans in like 2 towns. I also kept more like pets, and they kept being friendly to me, so I had no reason to antagonize them. And no forgotten beasts, no beasts. I eradicated almost every single vampire until I put a vampire as an adventurer in the game. No more necromancers. There was really nothing to do. I just had dwarves, and some dwarves, and that was about it.
So it might be a fun experiment. Now, if I'm not mistaken, something happened and you ended up losing that world, right?
Yes, because I'm a smart man. I gave my old PC to my brother. I cleaned the disk, and after that, I realized I did not take several things out of my games, like my Minecraft worlds, my Dwarf Fortress worlds. Smart. Hurts.
Yeah, you know, that happens occasionally. I am the other end of it. That this is completely unrelated, but I cannot get rid of a computer without backing up everything but the operating system folders onto some external drive. So I have stacks of drives that have all kinds of old junk that I'm never going to use again, just sitting in my garage in a drawer. So I'm a pack rat. I just always feel like I'm going to need that piece of data that I never actually will. So.
Yeah, that is good. The other end of the bell curve is really bad, especially considering my Dwarf Fortress world that I played was like I don't know 4 years old, and I kept playing on it, so I don't know what the actual amount of hours was that I put in, but definitely 3 digits. And my Minecraft world was literally 12 years old, so that hurt.
So it would be interesting to get another world, maybe a tiny world, to that situation again, to where everything else in the world is taken care of, and then just let it go, and see how many years it will build up if you just let it run all the time. Uh,
Yeah, that is a good question. I think it would ultimately still default to like zombie apocalypse because the main race in your fortress will be dwarves, and dwarves can have necromancers. So if you let it run for long enough, you will have a huge amount of dwarves, but also some necromancers, and they will then quickly spread and like reanimate whatever they find in the world, including all the forgotten beasts that you have slayed.
yeah, Tony, the world that you're streaming right now, that is the one that is full of necromancers, right?
It is. It's pretty gruesome from that perspective. I've tried this world a lot in different incarnations, and yeah, pretty much the whole thing is dominated by necromancer towers. I guess there's some islands down in the south.
I wonder what's special about this location that you're in now, that it's not, that it hasn't succumbed to the undead sieges.
Well, I don't know. That's a really good question. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Every other place that I landed, there's one tower nearby, which we're at war at, but they haven't been over to bother us yet. So I don't know if there's something that stands in the way, or I don't know. Every other thing. This was I called it my hubris fort, because the first fort I started, I was like, I'm going to build a fort on the ice sheet just to show that I know what I'm doing here. And it was like, I lasted not even a whole year before the zombies came and just wiped us clean. And then I was, just trying to make it sequentially easier on myself, and I kept failing. And then I built this fort kind of and I told you so to you guys. I'm like, look, it really is hard. And then of course now this fort's been going for several years, so I feel like a bit of a heel. But I've struggled with this one. It's just danger island. But there is a goblin island in this one as well, where nearly the whole island is almost all goblins. Like, it's just goblin pit everywhere.
Thing down there.
Yeah, if you're looking at the stream, like every single.
Yeah, exactly. And the problem with that is you can't really get rid of those anymore, because as a single adventurer, you can't go into like the really large pits, because that might just break your game. FPS death, as we have explained. And building a fortress is like instant sieges as you get over the border of getting sieges. So,
Yeah.
The safe way to play on this one would be to go to one of these islands with I'm not sure what the quotation marks mean on the world map, but the quotation
volcanoes, I think, right?
No, that's the carrot, right? I think the volcano is the carrot.
Oh, okay. Then it's probably red forest, because the world map actually does show the differences in colors and trees depending on the season.
Oh, it described it as a prairie. So maybe maybe quotation marks are prairies. Who knows?
That would make sense. Grass.
Yeah, prairies. That's right. Quotes are prairies. Okay, well, hey, you learn something every day. Prairies are a green type of punctuation. And then the little circle is a human monastery. Okay, well, goodness.
All right.
You live and you learn. All right.
So I think we're going to wrap this up for today. We are probably going to do another one of these episodes because I had like 5 topics that we might cover as, phrases that Dwarf Fortress players say that everyone else in the world just looks at them and goes, huh?
Yep.
And so we have a few more of those, like the difference among forgotten beasts, night creatures, intelligent undead, what the heck's up with the elves, and things like that. So we will revisit this in another episode in the future. But until then, I hope everyone has a good time playing Dwarf Fortress, and I guess we will catch everybody later. Oh,
Yeah.
That was a really quick wrap up. I didn't even...
It was smooth, to the point, and I feel appropriate.
Yes.
Do we need to close the loop on the dog mares, or do you feel like we've covered that?
Oh god, no! I think we can pick it up next time again. How about that?
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I'm going to have the image for our episode be a dog mare if I can find one. So.
Cat
Mayormax.com.
mayors win.
Look, Mayormax. You should go to that site.
What is it again?
Mayormax.com.
Mayor Max. Actually, I'm checking that out myself.
There it is. Yep.
You won't
Mayor
regret
Max.
it.
Mayormax.com. My god.
Yeah.
Appropriately, his certificate of appointment is in Comic Sans. So.
Oh, okay. Okay. Don't you shit on Comic Sans, buddy.
I'm just saying, it's appropriate for a dog mare. It's the actually appropriate use of Comic Sans.
It is.
All right.
Okay.
So if I hit stop streaming, is that going to break us?
Don't do it yet.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's actually. So for everyone out there, happy fortressing. Oh, that's awful. God.
Happy
Why can't
fortressing.
I need to script out the ending of these stinking episodes. All right. So until next time, everyone have a good time playing Dwarf Fortress, and I will edit together something that isn't horrible from that. So you guys want to say goodbye?
See you later, guys.
Good. Yeah. Goodbye.
Okay. So, all right. I think I'm going to stop recording myself here, and yeah, I think now if you want to stop the live stream, that would.